The Foreign Affairs Department is seeking clemency for a Filipina on death row in Indonesia over drug trafficking charges. This comes after the state visit of President Bongbong Marcos in the capital city of Jakarta. Mary Jane Veloso has been in jail for over a decade now. While efforts by the government to free Veloso are recognized by her supporters, they say President Marcos should have raised the appeal for clemency to his counterpart, Indonesian President Joko Widodo. Good evening, I'm Pia Hontiveros. Welcome to your weekly political appointment fix, politics as usual. Our first guest tonight, ang ama ni Mary Jane Veloso, si Ginoong Cesar Veloso. Magandang gabi po sa inyo, Mr. Veloso. Kamusta na po kayo?
Ito po, may sakit.
Ano pong sakit ninyo, Mr. Veloso?
Mataas po yung diabetes ko, cholesterol.
I see, okay.
Saka nahihilo po ako.
Alright. Mr. Veloso, sabi po ninyo kahapon na walang nagawa ang mga dating Pangulo. Pero may nagawa naman po si dating Pangulong Noynoy Aquino dahil nakuha niyang ipawalang bisa pansamantala, no, or pinastay ang execution ni Mary Jane. I'm sure nasabi po sa inyo yon na maraming medyo nagko-correct po sa inyo sa social media tungkol doon.
Opo, kasi kaya ko po nasabi na wala namang natulong ang ating Pangulong Noynoy Aquino noon dahil pumunta po kami sa Malacanang, pinagpasa-pasahan po kami doon. Lumapit po kami sa isa, doon kayo pumunta. Pagdating po namin sa isa, doon kayo pumunta hanggang hindi po natapos yung aming lapit sa kanila.
Kailan po iyon, Mr. Veloso, at anong taon po iyon?
Nung nahuli po yung aking anak, siguro mga 2011, ganyan. Talaga pong nag-arkila po kami ng sasakyan, pumunta po kami sa Malacanang, sa mga tauhan po ni Presidente Noynoy noon. Umakyat po kami sa taas.
Okay.
Pinakita po namin yung papel po namin. Ang sabi po yung isa, pumunta po kayo doon. Pagdating po namin doon sa itinuro, pumunta kayo doon. Pagdating na naman po namin doon, punta kayo doon hanggang umuwi po kami na wala po kaming natanggap na kung ano man yung sasabihin nila dapat.
Pero Mr. Veloso, ang nangyari po noong 2015 ay nagkaroon po ng stay sa execution. Ibig sabihin po, hindi tinuloy ng Indonesia ang execution ng inyong anak dahil nga po tumawag si Pangulong Aquino doon sa foreign minister ng Indonesia. So kung sasabihin po ninyo na pinagpasapasahan po kayo sa Malacanang noong 2011, pero may naging resulta eventually.
Yun po kasi nung taon po na yun, nasa Indonesia na po kami, hindi na namin po alam kung ano po nangyayari dito sa Pilipinas. Kaya hindi po namin alam kung nakatulong po siya o hindi.
Pangalawang appeal na po ito for executive clemency, Mr. Veloso, dahil nag-appeal din ang Aquino administration noong 2011. So malaki siguro ang pag-asa ninyo that this time around, baka mas maganda ang magiging resulta. Sa tingin po ba ninyo, parang suntok sa buwan na po ito?
Opo, nasisiyan na po kami dito. At kasi iba na po yung ang DFF po nagsabi na bigyan ng clemency si Mary Jane Veloso, kaya nagpapasalamat po kami. At sana po mas maganda po sana kung ang ating presidente na si President Marcos na nagsabi ng clemency kay Widodo. Kasi po siya ang makapangyarihan sa lahat.
Okay. Pero ang nangyari po nga ay, kumbaga, sumunod lang siguro sa proseso ang gobyerno ng Pilipinas dahil may proseso po yun eh. Kailangan ang Department of Foreign Affairs ng Pilipinas ang magsampa ng or mag-appeal para sa executive clemency. Bukod sa personal na sabihin ni Pangulong Marcos doon kay Pangulong Widodo. So hindi po ba sapat sa inyo na ang DFA natin ay naghain ng appeal for executive clemency?
Sapat na po sa amin yon. Kaya nagpapasalamat po nga po kami sa ating mga DFA na nasabi po nila, nabanggit nila na bigyan ng clemency yung aking anak. Pero mas maganda po sana kung ang ating Pangulo ang magsabi ng bigyan ng clemency si Mary Jane Veloso kay Widodo.
Kahapon din po, Mr. Veloso, sa inyong interview sa mga media, mga press conference, meron po kayong hawak na isang poster nakalagay po doon na Bring Mary Jane Home. Ngayong gabi, uuwi ang Pangulong Marcos galing nga sa Indonesia muna, tapos sa Singapore, pero hindi po niya kasama, hindi po niya naiuwi si Mary Jane ngayon.
Opo.
Dahil nga po sa proseso na sinusundan.
Opo. Maski po hindi niya nadala po ang aking anak, nagpapasalamat po kami na yun nga po, yung DFA na sabi ng clemency, hindi po kami nawawalan ng pag-asa na masabi ang ating Pangulo na bigyan ng clemency ang aking anak dahil 12 taon naman na po na nagdusa ang aking anak na walang kasalanan.
Walang kasalanan sa tingin po ninyo? Walang kasalanan?
Wala po, wala. Mabait po yung aking anak.
So hindi po niya alam kung ano yung laman ng bagahe niya, in other words?
Opo, hindi niya po alam. Dahil po nung pumunta po sila sa Malaysia, ni yung recruiter, nagulat yung anak ko at bakit mag-stayin sila ng 3 araw doon.
Okay.
Ang sabi po ni Christina, huwag kang mag-alala, Mary Jane, huwag kang umiyak. At pupunta ako ng Indonesia at maghahanap ako ng employer mo.
Okay.
Pagdating po ng 3 araw, ayun na nga po. Meron ng 2 lalaki na nag-abot sa maleta.
Alright. Of course,
Pagdating po ng airport ng Malaysia, meron pong lalaking bumitbit sa kanyang bagahe. Kaya po nakalusot sa Malaysia ang kanyang bagahe.
Okay. Alright.
Pagdating po ng Indonesia, ayun na nga po, siguro hindi alam nung anak ko na may shabu yun, diretso po sa loob, pina-x-ray niya yung bag niya, ayun na nga po, doon na nga po natuklasan na may shabu yung kanyang maleta.
Mr. Veloso, tulad ng sinabi po ninyo at last question na lang po ito, 12 taon nang nagdurusa yung anak po ninyo sa Indonesia. Ngayon, 19 years old at 14 years old yung dalawa niyang anak, which means yung bunso niya, 3 years old siguro, 2 to 3 years old pa lang nung umalis siya sa Maynila. So, hindi niya naaalala ang nanay niya, yung bunso ni Mary Jane?
Ay, naalaala po. Ito na nga po ang problema. Binubuli na po sila sa school. Kaya ngayon po, hindi na po sila nag-aaral. Kaya po naaawa ako sa mga bata. Bakit naman binubuli nila yung mga apo ko? Kaya po sa ngayon, hindi na po sila pumapasok. Kahirap po.
Alright. Maraming salamat po sa inyo, Mr. Cesar Veloso, ang ama ni Mary Jane Veloso. Salamat po, sir. We will be back after this quick break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This is Politics as usual. Our next guest is the National Union of People's Lawyers Secretary General, also a lawyer for Mary Jane Veloso, who is in Indonesia on death row for drug charges. Attorney Ray Cortez. Good evening po, Attorney Cortez. Let's begin with, you wanted to make a clarification dun po sa tanong ko at naging sagot ni Mr. Cesar Veloso about the previous administrations not having assisted or helped Mary Jane.
Kasi ang context nila doon ay assistance during the trial itself. Remember the trial, I think, commenced in 2010 at the time of his presidency. At he was convicted during that time and even during the appeal process. Yung request for clemency was made after the conviction was already made, and I think yung effort talaga to stay the execution was in 2015.
15, right.
Yung period, meron ng uproar. May uproar na regarding or publicly made known na yung execution niya to be scheduled originally April 9. It was reset to April 29 or along that date.
Okay, because people on social media were taking issue with that, saying meron namang nagawa si dating Pangulong Noy Aquino in the sense that he made that phone call to the Indonesian foreign minister. He got a stay on the execution in the hours leading up to that scheduled execution.
We recognize the effort of the President Aquino on that point. Ang context nung kay Tatay Cesar ay walang tulong ang gobyerno ng Pilipinas during the stage ng trial, even after conviction and during the appeal. So, yung effort started when the schedule for execution was already made public.
Okay. So itong appeal for executive clemency of the Marcos administration is considered the second appeal. What do you think are, I know it's a very simplified question, what do you think are the chances now? Because this has been such a long, drawn-out battle, and given Indonesia's stance on drug trafficking, what are Mary Jane's chances of coming home?
Mahirap sabihin na it will get a positive result, pero at least masasabi natin na since Widodo stayed the execution, which is a reprieve, pero at the same time ay nandun pa yung conviction and possible execution, it's a matter that is with the Indonesian government now that the appeal for clemency was communicated by the DFA to their Foreign Affairs Ministry. Mahirap sabihin, it's a political decision on the part of the Indonesian government.
Right, political decision. And also, this is not the first case of a foreign national on death row for drug charges. There have been other foreign nationals and they have been executed.
I believe so, and I think there were Australians,
yes,
that were scheduled or were actually executed on the night that Mary Jane was supposed to be executed. But of course, subject to verification, there is allegedly a French national who was granted a pardon and was released and was not executed upon the pressure of the French government. Pero yun kumbaga subject to verification. But they do it.
Attorney Cortez, in a way, we can say that very timely itong first state visit ni Pangulong Marcos sa Indonesia pa man, no? Because it shined or shone the light again on Mary Jane Veloso's case, right, sir?
But dinadagdagan ko lang din yung sinabi na Tatay Cesar kanina na napaka-importante ng visit na ito insofar as Mary Jane is concerned. Pero, and in fact, okay na yun na nagpadala ng communication ng Department of Foreign Affairs regarding sa clemency.
Right.
Pero siyempre, mas malaki sana yung impact kung yung Chief Executive ng Filipinas ang nagsabi o nag-request ng executive clemency sa counterpart niya na presidente naman ng Indonesia. Kumbaga, lesser na ang channels na nagdadaanan kasi directly na with the office of the President of Indonesia from the President of the Philippines yung request for executive clemency.
But still, what we saw happening was the administration following Indonesian processes, right? This is part of the process, inter-country courtesy, that you file a formal appeal for executive clemency as required by processes, right?
It's part of the process, but there's nothing that should have
That should stop.
prevented the president from asking the request directly to the Indonesian president, especially the DFA secretary is his mere alter ego, so he can do it directly.
All right.
But they opted to do it through the foreign minister, through the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, through the Foreign Ministry of Indonesia.
Okay. One last question, Attorney Ray. Apart from waiting for the result of this appeal for executive clemency by the Marcos administration, what else is on the agenda for this case of Mary Jane?
Sa ngayon we are trying to finalize with the courts yung deposition taking ni Mary Jane, which was scheduled earlier on, overtaken ng events.
Ito po yung sa recruiters niya, no?
We hope that it can be scheduled soon at makapagsalita na sa Mary Jane at makwento niya kung ano yung nangyari. So ito yung, aside from the request for clemency, ito ngayon yung pinagtutuunan namin ng pansin.
Attorney Ray Cortez, lawyer for Mary Jane Veloso and of the National Union of People's Lawyers, Secretary General of the NUPL. Maraming salamat po sa inyo, Attorney Ray. More on Mary Jane Veloso's case from our next guest when we return. This is Politics as Usual. We're still with Politics as Usual. I'm Pia Hontiveros. Our third guest tonight, UP College of Law Senior Lecturer Attorney Paulo Tamase. Good evening, Attorney Paulo. Let's begin with this. There's always criticism about the way a government handles a case such as Mary Jane Veloso's. So I have it's a two-pronged question. Should this be an issue? Because like sabi nga ni Attorney Ray at ni Mr. Cesar Veloso, sana si Pangulong Marcos mismo nagsabi kay Indonesian President Widodo instead of just having the DFA file that appeal for executive clemency. And also the second issue here is yung criticism of the Aquino administration naman na wala naman daw nagawa. That administration and the Duterte administration, although in fact there was that stay of execution in 2015. So how are we supposed to look at these 2 points?
Right. Thank you for having me, Pia. So I think on the first point, whether I think with regard to whether the President Marcos should have himself communicated or appealed for the clemency instead of through what the previous guest said is the alter ego, I think it's ultimately a diplomatic call. The way that pardons are used in the as a diplomatic tool or as a diplomatic bargaining chip really deals with a lot of sensitive information that sometimes it may not be the president himself who knows or who knows very deeply how to navigate diplomatic relations. And so it sometimes benefits the government's position to negotiate through the person who would know better the relations. Sometimes it would be the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, sometimes it's the ambassador in the country. I think the second question you raised is really whether the previous governments have done enough. And I think the point that I really want to make is pardons are among those forgiveness or gifts or graces by governments that really differ from state to state. And so, for example, I understand from Indonesia that there is a single application rule for them. So you can only formally ask, go through the judicial process in Indonesia for pardon once. And so maybe the government has been in the past trying to take the temperature whether it would be successful to actually prosecute an application for pardon. If you recall, and I think it was mentioned in the previous interview, there really were executions even by high-profile or more powerful so-called states like Australia. Their citizens were actually executed. Right. So it may be a strategic call on the part of the previous administrations and even this administration.
Attorney Paolo, I just want to clarify, no? Sabi mo dapat isang beses lang nag-appeal for executive clemency. But there was that appeal for executive clemency in early 2015 by the Aquino administration, and then this one also. So paano yun?
Right. Yeah, to clarify, so I understand from the previous experience of the other nationalities have requested for clemency that there's a single application. But this is the formal application that you file before the Indonesian authorities. I think when we say about, or we talk about the President Aquino or President Marcos appealing for clemency, we may be talking about informal channels here. So, for example, I understand from the press conference of the presidential spokesperson, I think either this morning or yesterday, that there were informal appeals made. That would be a form of appeal between the heads of state or between their agents.
Yes.
That would not be counted normally in the legal process.
Yeah. I asked about that issue na dapat si Pangulong Marcos mismo, because for me it seems significant that the day before he meets with President Widodo, his foreign secretary is the one who files that appeal for executive clemency. So, and like you said, no, it's a diplomatic matter. So it looks like it was handled appropriately. Tama ba?
It would be hard to speculate. Like this diplomatic channels are really a black box, unfortunately.
Okay.
But it seems to be consistent with laying the groundwork for discussions between the heads of state. So there are many considerations when a president grants pardons, regardless of the legal system. There are optical questions, for example. I mean, the Indonesian government has a very strong war on drugs and anti-drug policy.
Right.
And they need to take the temperature on whether it would be acceptable to their domestic stakeholders
and
to
they
grant
will
a pardon for a foreign national.
Right, and they will have to handle the repercussions at home, because if they executed other foreign nationals, then their people might say, oh, bakit ito pinalusot nyo? So there are questions like that, right, Attorney Paolo? Kanina may binanggit kayo na you use the term forgiveness. So this is the definition of executive clemency. Very quickly, can you go through those different kinds of forgiveness that a state can give a person? And the other question here is, does pardon require admission of guilt? Meaning, if kung mapardon si Mary Jane, kailangan ba niyang sabihin, oo nga, guilty nga ako?
Right. So it really depends on a state-to-state basis, but generally the forms of executive clemency would include pardon, which is forgiving the penalty. It would include amnesty, which is effectively erasing the crime. They include reprieve, which is delaying the execution of the sentence. I understand this was already given at some point to Pia Jane Veloso. If it requires an admission of guilt, it really depends again on the system. But most systems don't require an admission of guilt, because pardon is a political tool also. It can blunt very harsh penalties for minor offenses. It can protect whistleblowers. And in the case of the Philippines, it has also been used before for diplomatic or foreign relations reasons. And so it would really depend on the policy of that state.
Okay. I know this next question, and this will be my last, no? Parang we're going two-way ahead, because parang bang suntok sa buwan na ito, no? Like I asked Mr. Veloso earlier, if, for example, Mary Jane Veloso does get clemency, what happens next, no? Is she returned home here to the Philippines? And if she is returned home here, if she gets to come home, is she a free woman, or is she going to be in jail or in prison also?
Right. So first, on the consequences of the pardon in Indonesian law, I would not be familiar whether there would be a limitation on the effect of pardon. The pardon can only be just essentially for them lowering the penalty from death. But assuming that she is able to fly back, the crime that Mary Jane Veloso supposedly committed is a crime in Indonesia and not a crime in the Philippines. It didn't happen here. So there is no reason for the Philippine government to keep her under detention or to execute the penalty here, unless there is some agreement between the two states for that arrangement, which will have its own legal issues.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on the show. We hope to have you again. Attorney Paulo Tamase, UP College of Law Senior Lecturer. Maraming salamat po, sir. We've been told before we shouldn't talk politics at the dinner table or the family reunion or in group chats, digital or otherwise. But we can talk about it here at this table on this show, your weekly political appointment fix, politics as usual. I'm Pia Hontiveros. See you back here next Wednesday, 8 p.m.